Yate, Shio, hello, and welcome to the fourth presentation of our Indigenous Speaker Series. The Indigenous Education Institute, along with the National Parks and Bureau of Land Management, is proud and honored to present A Sense of Place, Indigenous Perspectives of Land and Sky. Our fourth speaker of the series is Dr. Greg Cajete, who will be speaking today. The title of his talk is Native Astronomy Through Native Eyes. My name is Nancy Maryboy, and I am the founding president of the Indigenous Education Institute. We are a nonprofit institution with an all-Indigenous board and staff that has been in existence for 25 years. We are located in the San Juan Islands, Washington, and on the Navajo Nation. Our mission is to preserve, protect, and apply traditional Indigenous ways of knowing to contemporary life with a focus on Native education, environmental change, and sustainable, healthy environments on earth, water, and skies. Much of our work concerns the creation of collaborations with integrity between Western science and traditional Indigenous ways of knowing. I would like to begin our series today with a heartfelt acknowledgement of the Indigenous peoples of the world. Usually, we acknowledge the land on which we are living or presenting, but in this day and age of virtual online realities, we are honoring Indigenous people around the world. I would also like to acknowledge the people of the land of the Santa Clara Pueblo, New Mexico, the home of our speaker, Tewa Indian, Dr. Cajete. The presentations in this series have been chosen to reflect an awareness of the foundations of traditional thinking. In Native ways, everything is interconnected. So rather than a specific focus on biology, astronomy, or other separate disciplines, we will be presenting worlds of interrelationships and processes of reciprocity. I want to thank you personally for attending this webinar. The interest you have shown is overwhelming. We have over 1,100 people registered from all across the United States, and we have participants from around the world, including Canada, Brazil, New Zealand, Aotearoa, Ecuador, and South Africa. It's also interesting that we have more than 137 tribes represented in our registrations for this presentation today, and I welcome each and every one of you. I would like now to turn the mic over to my colleague, Marcia.
Hi, everyone. I'm Marcia DeChadnay, the manager of San Juan Islands National Monument. One of the purposes of this monument's designation, as it is defined in law, is for the protection, conservation, and restoration of Coast Salish resources and cultural properties. And we work with 12 Coast Salish tribes to fulfill that purpose. Federal land managers across the nation are working on the same challenge. And this is one of the points of this speaker series, expanding awareness and understanding for cultural differences to support more successful working relationships. We're working for collaboration with integrity. Our first presentation, Dr. Little Bear, his presentation began the series and detailed the metaphysics of science, the age of reason, Lockean theory, and the strength of science in context with its culture. Kayu Kimura then took the next step, integrating that position with the application to educational institution, again, serving the needs of communities of place and communities of interest. Dr. Robin Kimmerer, our third speaker, was speaking of the fortress, the river, and the garden. And today we have Dr. Gregory Cajete from Santa Clara Pueblo. Following his presentation, we'll offer some questions to him that you posed during your registration. At the very end of this webinar, you'll see a page with contact information for each of the partners and you are welcome to reach out to all of us, including Dr. Cajete individually. This and all of the Sense of Place Indigenous Perspectives on Land and Sky presentations are recorded and can be accessed at the Indigenous Education Institute website shortly following the events. As you have registered by email, we will also share notices to you for upcoming presentations. I'm pretty excited. Nancy, let's go.
Thanks, Marcia. It's my greatest pleasure now to introduce our guest speaker and a very good friend, Dr. Greg Cajete. Dr. Cajete is a Native American educator whose work is dedicated to honoring the foundations of Indigenous knowledge in education. He's a Tewa Indian from Santa Clara Pueblo, New Mexico. He has served as a New Mexico Humanities Scholar in Ethnobotany of Northern New Mexico and as a member of the New Mexico Arts Commission. In addition, he has lectured at colleges and universities in the US, Canada, Mexico, New Zealand, England, Italy, Japan, and Russia. Dr. Cajete worked at the Institute of American Indian Arts, IAIA, in Santa Fe, New Mexico for 21 years. While at the Institute, he served as the Dean of the Center for Research and Cultural Exchange, Chair of Native American Studies, and Professor of Ethnoscience. In 1995, he was offered a position in American Indian Education at the University of New Mexico College of Education. And Dr. Cajete has been at UNM ever since. He has recently retired this June as Professor Emeritus and former director of the Native American Studies program. Dr. Cajete earned his Bachelor of Arts degree from New Mexico Highlands University with majors in both biology and sociology and a minor in secondary education. He received his Master of Arts degree from the University of New Mexico in adult and secondary education. He received his PhD from International College, Los Angeles, New Philosophy program in social science education with an emphasis in Native American studies. Dr. Cajete is widely known for designing culturally responsive curricula geared to the Native needs and learning styles of Native American students. These curricula are based upon Native American understanding of the nature of nature and utilizes this foundation to develop an understanding of the science and artistic thought processes as expressed in Indigenous perspectives of the natural world. He has pioneered reconciling Indigenous perspectives in science with Western academic settings, and his focus has been on teaching culturally based science with its emphasis on health and wellness. Dr. Cajete is also an artist and participates in his Pueblo ceremonies. Perhaps he is most widely known as an author of many books, including Look to the Mountain, An Ecology of Indigenous Education, and Ignite the Sparkle, an Indigenous Science Education Curriculum Model, and Spirit of the Game, Indigenous Wellsprings, and People's Ecology, Explorations in Sustainable Living, and Native Science, Natural Laws of Interdependence. And now it is my great pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Greg Cajete.
A very beautiful and eloquent introduction. Sengithamo, as we say in my language, Tewa, which means simply good day to all of you. This is really a great pleasure and honor, to have the opportunity to share some of my work in the context of Native science and Native astronomy. As Nancy may have mentioned, I have been a longtime educator in Native education. I completed my 46th year as a Native educator this past school year, and just retired from the University of New Mexico. So the presentation today native astronomy through native eyes, seen through native eyes, is one of the presentations actually that I created while I was at the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, and developing a native science curriculum there. And of course that evolved into actually several books, including Ignite the Sparkle and also Native Science. My more recent work includes actually indigenous communities, teachings of the seventh fire. It also includes a book called Native Minds Rising, and also Sacred Journeys, which are both books that have just recently come out during the COVID. They came out basically in April. And these are the works of my students, my doctoral students over the years, as they have taken their own pathways, their own, explorations of research related to indigenous themes, indigenous education. So I'm very proud of that, those accomplishments as well. So without any further ado, I want to get into the presentation. It is a rather long presentation, and I know that although I'm very used to giving long-winded lectures, I'm not sure how the audience will do with some of these thoughts and ideas, over a long period of time, almost an hour or more. But I'm hoping that you'll be able to follow my trend of thought with regard to this aspect of native science. I should say that I've done a lot of different kinds of presentations, and this is just one of many, specifically looking at indigenous relationships to the sky. I have other presentations that deal with animals and native myth and reality, geoscience, from a native perspective, place and people. Others that deal with native philosophy, and still others that deal with native communities. So I do a variety of different kinds of presentations in this regard. So this is just one of many. So I hope you enjoy it, and hopefully you'll have some good questions at the end of this. It's extensive material, but I think you're going to enjoy this journey through native eyes into the history of native astronomy. So with that, I'll go ahead and share screen. So as you see there, this is the title, Native Astronomy Through Native Eyes. And one of the things that really I've attempted to do during my career is really be somewhat of an interpreter of Native history with regard to indigenous thought and perspectives related to our amazing traditions of native science. So this is just one of those many presentations that I've done in the past. Again, these are references that were used for this particular presentation. Some of the better books I would consider with regard to native science. Much of my content is drawn from these books, including photos that you'll see a little bit later on. So as I see there, each of the slides that you're about to see represent a window into the cultural history and heritage of indigenous peoples of Americas in regard to astronomy. I must apologize that I have not included the Hawaiian history of astronomy because that's a whole story unto itself, and I felt it would be best to leave it to one of our indigenous Hawaiian astronomers to do that work. And to do that kind of presentation. So this really concerns really just North America, including Canada and Mexico and into parts of Central America, South America. But indeed, behind each slide is a whole history and numerous stories of amazing heritage as indigenous people. So I use a concept called windows and mirrors in the sense that when I do these presentations, if you're an Indigenous person and have some knowledge and understanding of your Indigenous ways of knowing, as you see a different slide, let's say coming from a different Indigenous culture, you tend to relate what you know and what you understand about your own traditions, to the slide. So that's kind of a mirroring effect. It's also a window into another tradition, another viewpoint, another perspective. If you're a non-Indigenous viewer, many times learning about Indigenous histories for the first time, this gives you some insight into the depth, the sophistication, and also the wealth of understanding of Indigenous traditions all over the world with regard to just this one area of Native science, Native astronomy. But remember that there are many kinds of dimensions to Indigenous knowledge of science that one can explore as well. So from my perspective, it's our task in the 21st century to not only remember these histories, but in many ways possible, recreate or revitalize these bodies of ancestral knowledge in new and contemporary ways. And this is usually what I say to my students in the context of why they would want to study or why they should study Indigenous histories of science. Because in many ways, that forms the foundation, not only for insight and understanding into a sense of tradition and identity, but also forms a foundation from which they can draw from creatively in whatever fields they may go into, particularly if they go into a field of science, as a foundation for the work that they want to do in the sciences. So that's an impetus. I'll start with some ancient history in the context of this slide. Paleo-Indian Hunters Calendar. This is a site in Baja, Mexico, about 300 miles from into Baja, and you'll find a site there. It's actually an outcropping, a ledge, a rock ledge, and it faces the east. And it's actually the earliest record that we know that we have found that records a calendar that actually is a calendar. It's something like 8,000 years old. And it is situated in such a site where you can actually see the movement of the sun from horizon to horizon. And also because of the tally marks, we know that this site was probably used to gauge the time of the solstices and also the equinoxes. Why Indigenous hunters would need that kind of knowledge in those times, 8,000 years ago, was probably because they were timing the migrations of certain animals that they hunted so that they would be in the right place at the right time. And so we know that Indigenous science, and particularly Indigenous astronomy, has had a practical foundation as well as other foundations, ceremonial and others, with regard to the ways in which Indigenous Native peoples use that knowledge in their world at that time. So as it says here, observations of sun and moon form the basis for the ceremonial calendars designed to time essential life activities such as hunting, gathering, planting, fishing. These observations also help to predict celestial events, set ceremonial schedules, and mark the times for festivals, war, even to legitimize political and religious authority. Indeed, Native cultures recognize no clear dividing lines between nature and the cosmos on one hand, and human spirituality and affairs on the other. So when we talk about Native science, we're basically talking about an integrated way of knowing that integrates, scientific observation. with other aspects of being human in the world, so to speak. Another example of ancient native astronomy is inclusive of the medicine wheels. One great example that we can find is the Bighorn medicine wheel in Wyoming. And if you take a look at this slide, you can see that it's situated such, it's designed in such a way that if you stand in one corner, you can see the summer solstice sunrise. If you stand in another corner of the wheel, you can see the summer solstice sunset. If you stand in yet another part of the wheel, F, you can see the indicator stars. We call these indicator stars Aldebaran, Rigel, and Sirius. So these are stars that you can see in the night sky where you can actually begin to anticipate the days to summer solstice and other kinds of celestial events. So we know that indigenous peoples at that time had great sophistication, based on their understanding of how nature operated in their world. One of the oldest known of these dates back to about 2500 BC, about the time of the early Egyptian pyramids and the beginnings of Stonehenge in England. So there was an interesting phenomena that if you study world archaeoastronomy, you can find that different peoples in different parts of the world were basically practicing similar kinds of what we call observation astronomies, erecting places like Stonehenge, creating medicine wheels, creating different kinds of mechanisms to time the movements of the sun and moon, particularly in terms of developing some of the first calendars, and predicting the movement of the sun and moon in relationship to the seasons. So one can call this kind of astronomy what we would say would be horizon astronomy, because it's based on observation through your eyes and through your senses. And that certainly is the case with the medicine wheel that one finds at the Bighorn medicine wheel in Wyoming. They were involved with a very particular kind of relationship with the natural world. And I should pause a bit here and just explain that a little bit more. Indigenous worldviews are what we call relational worldviews. And the central question in indigenous science or native science is how am I as an individual or as individuals, how are we related to this, whatever is being observed in the natural world, whether it's the movement of the sun and moon, the changes of the seasons, the relationship to plants, relationship to animals, relationships to places. So essentially, indigenous worldview is what we call a relational worldview. And so the kinds of things that are focused on in native science are exactly those things that help to develop insight to the nature of those relationships that were so important to sustaining the life and the cultures of indigenous people through time and through generations. And so
excuse me, Greg, I need to jump in for just a second. We're having some technical glitches and a lot of people are reporting that they cannot see your slides. I don't believe the issue is on your side, but anybody who's having a problem, please leave the meeting and rejoin. That seems to be the solution. We have many people that are having no issues seeing the slides, but the solution seems to be leave the meeting and rejoin, and that should solve everything. In the meantime, please keep sending us your questions and letting us know. And I am going to hand this back over to Dr. Cajete now to pick back up on his presentation. Thanks for
One-
understanding, everybody.
Thank you, Chris, and please feel free to break in as you choose, as you feel necessary in the context of those kinds of announcements. So as I was saying, you know, essentially what we're looking at when we're looking at native astronomies are what we call horizon astronomies, and that was the ability to gauge and to time the movements of important celestial events, particularly the movement of the sun and moon through the year, and to use those understandings and those insights and those sightings, you know, as a basis for predicting those movements. And so that's the basis of astronomy, wherever you find it, you know. And I should say that all cultures, all human cultures develop forms of astronomy. So as I say there, the Bighorn Medicine Wheel, which is near Sheridan, Wyoming, is believed to be about 3,000 years old. There's another medicine wheel that's close to that called the Fort Smith Medicine Wheel. It's on the Crow Reservation in Montana, and Moose Mountain Medicine Wheel in Saskatchewan. And they appear to offer the clearest evidence of early plains observatory use. Cairns of stone on some of their radial lines and at the center of the circle mark key points which, when used as points on a sight line, give an accurate determination even today of these summer solstice sightings or these summer solstice events. So this is a map that sort of indicates where we find the greatest concentration of medicine wheels. Remember, these go back as long, almost to 8,000 years ago, you know, in terms of their basic structures. And they evolved over a long period of time. This was just after the melting of the glaciers and probably the first movements of indigenous tribes in those areas or from those areas. So that tradition forms the foundation of later traditions that would adopt and would extend those kinds of understandings in some new ways. And so as Native peoples moved and began to populate more areas in North America, into Mexico, Central and South America, you find that these astronomy traditions evolved, you know, as the people move from place to place. Some of the most famous, you know, movements, of course, can be recorded among the mound builders in the Mississippi River Valley or area, including Cahokia, the Natchez, and also this is an example of a sun priest, and of how he may have greeted the sun during one of those very important ceremonies that marked the solstice. And again, this was, as I would say, a very common practice among Native tribes throughout North America with regard to particular kinds of ceremonies evolving and focusing on those key events of sun and moon. So the star priest is a very important figure in mound builder culture. He was responsible and could have also been a woman as well for setting the calendars and presiding over ceremonial activities. The mounds themselves may have functioned as observation sites, providing a better view of the horizon as being closer to the sun. Vestiges of summer solstice ceremonies continue into the present, being performed by Choctaw, Cherokee, Cree, and other southeastern Indian groups, all of whom are descendants of mound builder cultures. So you can see that there is an extensive history in any part of North America with regard to astronomies. of indigenous peoples. A little bit later on, after the mound builder cultures declined, various tribes related to the mound builder peoples began to populate the Central Plains. One of the most notable were the Skidi Pawnee, and they have the most extensive written record of their star lore. So that's why we draw from, their example, although the other Plains tribes had similar kinds of traditions and extensive knowledge of the stars and movement of the stars, the sun and moon as well. But this particular slide shows a Skidi Pawnee star robe being worn by a star priest, and much of the Skidi Pawnee traditional art form actually incorporates some aspect or some reference to star symbolism. So that's why I wanted to show this particular slide. Just to go on, the Skidi band of Pawnee were devoted and skillful star watchers. They were farmers and buffalo hunters living on both a sedentary and nomadic life, depending on the season. Their social and ceremonial life was structured around their star knowledge and mythology to such an extent that the related ritual practice was one of the most elaborate of many of the Plains tribes. The Skidi believed that all events on Earth were connected to celestial events. Stars were sacred beings who actively sought relationship with human relatives. In all aspects of their society, they tried to emulate the entities and the events that they perceived among the stars. And again, I think that it's really important now to bring in another concept that I used extensively when I talk about Native science. And this is the idea of resonance. So you see in this title, I have resonating with the stars. And in many ways, that was the intent of that relational worldview of indigenous people through the creation of star astronomies and star structures and star mythologies and star symbols. This whole concept of resonation. Resonating means to sound like or to resound what one is observing, what one is involved with. And so this idea of resonating was really one of the key elements, the key things that indigenous peoples were trying to attain, in a sense, a very focused relationship that resonated with the natural order of the world, of the cosmos, of the Earth Mother as well. So levels of star being, again, going on with the Skidi Pawnee, they categorized their star relationships in a hierarchy of cosmic levels. The first was Tariwahat, the great mystery or void, which held the heavens together, a cosmic field in which the stars lived and moved about in their dance of life. Also, this first level included red morning star, Mars, which was considered male, and was married to evening star, Venus, considered female. This marriage produced the first humans, the forefathers of the Skidi. At the second level was the North Star, Polaris, considered the chief of the stars, and a constellation they called the Circle of Chiefs, through which the chiefs of the Skidi were sanctified, or the chiefs of the Skidi sanctified their authority. At the next level were four principal stars that held up the heavens, located in the semi-cardinal directions: the northeast, the northwest, the southeast, the southwest. And next were the sun and moon, since they were perceived as being closer to the earth and therefore less powerful than the stars located at the higher levels. So you can see that the Skidi, as was true of all indigenous populations, had a very sophisticated view of how the natural order unfolded as they viewed the night sky. This is an example of one of the Skidi Pawnee earth lodges. It's actually a very effective structure. It's cool, very cool in the summer, very warm in the winter. It's structured very much like an earth beehive. But what was important, and I think is very important to understand, is that the Skidi constructed their earth lodges in such a way that it reflected their view of the cosmos. So astronomy had a particular application in Skidi lives. The traditional dwelling was a practical sky dome called the Earth Lodge, built of sod. Its opening was always to the east. It was cool in summer, warm in winter. The Earth Lodge was also a convenient place for people to sit on hot summer afternoons and tell the stories of the stars. The interior of the lodge replicated the universe as the Skidi Pawnee perceived it. So here's a slide of a Skidi Pawnee Earth Lodge. And you can see the various stations within the lodge itself, the structures. This is a schematic of the Earth Lodge. You can see the 4 principal pillars that hold up the lodge. And then around the pillars are actually 12 other smaller pillars that hold up the structure of the lodge, but also represent the different movements or different times of the year, the different months of the year that the Skidi Pawnee recognized. You can see the buffalo skull altar, and so as the first light of the sun pierces through the eastern entrance of the lodge, it would light up that altar and begin the day in a sacred way and symbolize, you know, the sacredness of that day and the sacredness of that time. So the other understanding I think that is very important to think about is this idea of sacred orientation. All tribes have, you know, a way to recognize these orientations and these places in the world. So for Native peoples, cardinal directions or semi-cardinal directions have both cosmological and metaphorical meanings. Particular plants are associated with each semi-cardinal direction. For the Skidi Pawnee, the southwest was associated with the box elder, the northwest with cottonwood, the northeast with elm, the southeast with willow. Animals like the mountain lion, the bear, the wolf are associated with the cardinal directions. Also natural phenomena such as winds and lightning, thunder, clouds, and colors. White, such as white, yellow, black, and red were associated with the 4 cardinal directions as well. And so just skipping to the slide before, you can see that the structure was basically a circle which oriented the Skidi Pawnee to their world. And here's a schematic of how those semi-cardinal directions incorporated different kinds of natural elements that symbolized, you know, the nature of those orientations, the connections to the cosmos and the connections to the earth. So when you see a structure like this, what you're seeing is a connection between the earth and the sky. And so very much along the themes of this lecture series, this I think denotes a really great exemplification of that idea of earth and sky and the connection of those and the relationship, I would say, of those spheres of life. So sacred directions are a very important concept among indigenous peoples. All indigenous peoples do recognize cardinal directions or semi-cardinal directions. The north, the south, the east, the above, the center, and below creates a sphere that is recognized by many tribes. And it is within that sphere, it is within that center that indigenous people place themselves and in a sense go about their life activities. And so it represents a metaphor for not only directions, but this concept of sacred orientation. So the Skidi Pawnee were very elaborate, in their conceptualization of the universe. So this is actually a buffalo hide star chart that was created by the Skidi Pawnee. And they depicted all of the stars that they could see in one of those quadrants, one of those cardinal directions. If you project those cardinal directions into the night sky, you have 4 basic quadrants. And each of those quadrants had a star chart associated with them, or a group of stars that were recognized by the Skidi Pawnee. And so you can see from this star chart, you can see the Milky Way and various other stars that were represented based on their brightness. That the size is also the size of the marking for the stars is also a representation of its brightness in the sky. And you can see this particular star chart has 365 dots that go around the exterior of the buffalo hide that represent the days of the year. I wanted to show you this because this really, I think, reflects the sophistication of indigenous astronomies, particularly the ways in which the Skidi Pawnee reflected it. In similar ways to the Polynesians' view of this, the sea and the sky, the plains is a place, it's really a very flat place. And really, sometimes it's hard to see where the sun is rising or when the sun is setting exactly. But if you look at the night sky and you're able to use the night sky as your frames of reference, various constellations, and their movement in the night sky during certain times of the year, you're able to actually navigate very similar to how one would navigate on the ocean. So there's a lot of parallels, between, let's say, Polynesian, Hawaiian forms of astronomy, particularly as it relates to navigation, and the ways that many plains tribes used the stars to move about the Great Plains in those times. The Skidi Pawnee traditions also exemplify an interface of native science with community, environment, and creative imagination in ways that are typical of indigenous peoples. And I think that's an important piece. Other tribes, of course, incorporated during the winter time, after the first day of winter, recording the events of the year. This is where the winter count among many of the Plains tribes comes from, in which it's a time when you settle in and you begin to record the history of the people during that year. And this was a very special task that was undertaken by usually a stargazer who also was a historian of the tribe. Observations of sun and moon form the basis for ceremonial calendars, essential life activities such as hunting, gathering, and fishing, predicting celestial events, and marking the size of festivals, war, even to legitimize political and religious authorities. Indeed, native cultures recognize no clear dividing lines between those ideas. So here we have another example of star astronomy. These are two different tribes, actually, Atam Man and a Creek chief. Both are holding what we call star canes. And many times these star canes were actually star counting, or rather moon counting or day counting sticks that were used to keep track of the movement of both the sun and moon during certain times of the year. And they also served as canes of authority. So that's why you find star canes, among very diverse indigenous groups in North America. These were called counting sticks, and they were carved canes or bundles of knot sticks. Generally, the elder who was responsible whose responsibility was to watch the heavens and count the days, was also a figure of authority. The preceding slide shows an Atum elder and a Creek chief, two very different tribes holding similar counting sticks of authority. And of course, constellations are very culture specific in many cases. There are many different ways to connect the dots, in the night sky to connect the stars. And so many of the stories that indigenous people have are actually star stories, and they're connected to their ways of naming those constellations. In many ways, the constellations also represented a kind of sacred map of the universe. For instance, among the Navajo people, they perceived an orderly beginning to the universe in balance. They attribute male and female characteristics to all forces of the natural world. The creator or supreme being created first man, first woman, coyote, and all other beings. These first beings, known to the Navajo as holy people, had great powers they used to assist in forming the universe in accordance with the design of the creator. All elements of the universe were created and arranged in ways to realize balance. Fire, water, air, earth were sacred, and each possessed male and female qualities. Going into South America, and I'm not sure this slide is not very clear, but what you should see is what we call a large geoglyph. And I would call these symbols of heaven and earth, the connection of heaven and earth. And so in the plains of Nazca, which are in Peru, there evolved about 300 BC a group called the Nazca, who were master potters, as well as farmers and fishermen. They're known today for their giant proportionally drawn forms called geoglyphs, among the largest and most sophisticated created by any culture in the world at that time. Until recently, these creations were a great mystery. And in fact, they were not even discovered until airplanes began to fly over this desert plateau along the east coast of Peru in the 1920s. Except for a bird's eye view of over 1,000 feet, the Nazca Plain geoglyphs are not fully visible from the land, but this is an example of some of what the geoglyphs look like. What's also important is that these geoglyphs were created one on top of each other, so we know that many generations of Nazca people were creating geoglyphs in the landscape over a period of time. It's thought that these were symbolic figures. They're like pathways on the earth, and they're walked to commemorate and to show respect for those particular symbols and those entities that are symbolized by those geoglyphs. They appear to be similar in concept to medicine wheels. They're associated along sight lines with the horizon and the solstice sun. The Nazca may have walked these lines created by these to create a symbolic resonance. And here again comes the word resonance with the special constellations they recognized in the heavens. Many are animals, hummingbirds, spider monkeys, llamas. There's also human effigy figures, of which have been represented on design motifs of Nazca pottery and textiles. These drawn forms, many measuring over 100 feet across, were part of a complex agriculturally inspired form of astronomy that predates most of the known astronomical traditions of North America. In those days, in the 1920s, Maria Reich, a Austrian mathematician, devoted her life to trying to understand, this phenomena of the geoglyphs. And in 1946, after years of work exploring the mathematics the Nazca used to measure, document, draw, and sweep each figure, she found them. She uncovered a giant spider, a huge monkey, fish, killer whales, a dog, a pair of lizards, a pair of llamas, flowers resembling seaweed, a pair of ant-like forms, other humanoid figures, and so on. And each figure was made in one solid unbroken line, so there were no intervening lines, suggesting that each was walked like a path to trace the outline of the figure as a way of ceremonially acknowledging or otherwise symbolically resonating with this figure. So that kind of gives you that insight into this idea of resonation. So let's now move to the Southwest, where I'm from, Chaco Canyon. And one of the big features that you find when you go into the Chaco Canyon area is a structure called Fajada Butte, a natural structure, natural entity there. In the late 1970s, Anna Safir, who I know very well, a photographic artist, began to explore this area in the Chaco Canyon, the Fajada Butte area. And on the third level of Fajada Butte, she found 3 inconspicuously placed slabs of sandstone, precisely situated so that the contrast of sunlight and shadow created a dagger form on a spiral carved in the sandstone wall for about a 2-hour period around high noon during summer solstice. And here are the sun daggers, or sun dagger stones, right against the face of about the 3rd tier up from the ground on Fajada Butte. The dagger of sun appears at noon on June 21st, summer solstice. Safir has that cycle of the moon during the spring and fall equinoxes. The dagger falls either to the right or to the left of the center. During midsummer, it lies in the center. And in midwinter, the 2 daggers of light bracket the spiral. So this is how it looks during that very magical time on June 21st, as the dagger begins to form behind those 3 slabs of stone. So this brings us to another concept in native astronomy called finding the center. There are many ways to view the sun using this dagger. One is a precise position in the sun time, and it's marking of that point in time and space when the sun is at the center of our earthly time. So metaphor and symbol and actual practical viewing of this township, this evolution of movements, and relationships between earth and sky and moon and sun were especially intriguing and important to many indigenous peoples. So that idea of light and shadow is also metaphoric. You know, another possibility is to display all perceptions of light and dark, the sacred duality of the universe, the sacred twins, order and chaos, yin and yang, male and female, the dance of time and space. So, you know, this idea of duality, you know, is being played out essentially simultaneously with the movements that one sees of sun and earth and captured by this sun dagger. So again, you can see there's various positions, various ways in which light and shadow play against the backdrop of Fajada Butte and those spirals that marks the equinoxes, midsummer and midwinter, during which two daggers actually appear and bracket the spiral that's behind those slabs of stone. So finding the center, thereby finding the center of our human life in a greater cosmic order. Of course, there's lots of different examples of this in Chaco Canyon. Here's a schematic of the great kiva of Casa Rinconada, which is as close to a perfect circle as is possible using just human instruments such as the hand and the elbow and the length of the arm, the length of the human body. So the kiva Casa Rinconada is as close to that perfect circle. On summer solstice, the sun rises in the east. A beam of light penetrates a small window cut in the wall of the kiva, and light pierces a small niche in the wall on the opposite side, announcing this all-important day of sun time. Imagine the power and awe experienced by the people sitting in the darkened kiva as the first ray of light illuminates the kiva on summer solstice. And that's what they may have seen on summer solstice sunrise. We know also in Chaco Canyon, there was a supernova, which I have to correct was in 1074, not 1274, which was visibly represented, you know, in Chacoan art. Its appearance may have been associated with extraordinary solar storm activity on the sun at that time, which in turn may have caused a long-term drought in the southwest. This is one conjecture for the dissolution and abandonment of the Chacoan complex shortly afterwards. So this is a depiction actually coming from Chaco Canyon. You can see the crescent moon, the supernova of 1074, and the human hand representing that it was being witnessed by the artist. So one, you know, is really intrigued, you know, with regard to how many different kinds of ways indigenous cultures represented astronomical knowledge in their architecture. And they constructed, and of course this is under research currently in Chaco Canyon, in terms of alignment of their buildings, you know, with the movements of the sky. And again, I don't have time to go into that detail, but know that a huge amount of research is going on with regard to archaeoastronomy and the positioning and alignment of many of the structures in Chaco Canyon with a much larger cosmic map that is beginning to emerge, you know, as a result of the study of Chaco. The Anasazi also had different kinds of ways to observe the sun. In Hoven, Utah, we have a structure called the Sun Tower. And the Sun Tower was also a way to catch that very important time of the movement of the sun. And so here in this schematic, you can see that certain niches were cut into the walls of the Sun Tower. And as the sunlight from a particular position of the sun shone into the interior of the room of the Sun Tower, you can see that it aligned with a particular position on a wall or a niche and marked summer solstice sunrise or summer solstice sunset or even equinox sunsets. So what really this shows is how ingenious indigenous people were, with regard to how they were able, without the use of modern day instrumentations, predict the movement of certain celestial bodies, such as the sun and moon. And this is how it may have looked, as a beam of light cut through one of those niches in the Sun Tower and was getting closer and closer to a niche that was cut specifically to measure that very important time of summer solstice. And of course, star stories galore that represent different kinds of relationships and different kinds of adventures indigenous peoples had, with regard to their understandings and their insights about celestial order. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to go ahead and move through this a little bit more quickly so that we can come to some bit of a closure here. Just to exemplify one of those star stories, I'll turn now to the Blackfoot legend of Scarface, which represents a archetypal hero's journey of spirit, a teaching story which reflects not only the courage of an individual in overcoming obstacles of cosmic proportions, but also the nature of the way indigenous people viewed relationships with all things, plants, animals, the earth, the sky. The sun, about face, that is the spiritual nature of character and our true selves. The story also is about journeying to the center, to that place that Indian people talk about. The community both within ourselves and the world as a whole, where knowledge and gifts of spirit can be obtained. In a place of spiritual vision, a place that one must learn how to seek, a place whose inherent message is to be found in the landscape of our souls and in that of the wondrous multiverse in which we live. So that's an excerpt from one of my books, Native Science. And in that, I wanted to really bring home that the star knowledge and what I've been talking about with regard to indigenous science of astronomy among Native peoples had a very personal kind of connection to what one would call the quintessential human search, which was a part of this journey into self, an exploration of self, an exploration of relationship to self, as well as an exploration of relationship to the natural world, to the places in which you live. And so it's kind of metaphoric of the quintessential journey I think that we are still on in many ways, with regard to the meaning, and here we're getting into meaning, the meaning that the star knowledge had for various indigenous peoples. And I think we're searching for those kinds of meanings today as we speak and as we view this presentation. So Nancy, I'm not sure how well I'm doing with time, but I think I'm getting very close. I'm going to go through these slides very quickly now, just so that we can get to the end and start a brief conversation. So I'm not going to make too much more narrative on this. And
Greg, if you can hear me, I think you do have enough time. We won't cut this off till 1:30, but that
Okay.
we'll just leave a little time for questions.
Okay.
And there's so many good questions coming in that I think we're going to ask people to send you the questions if we don't have
All
time.
right.
But I'm also getting
right.
comments from people that would love you to continue, and please continue. So
Okay.
don't feel
Okay. So I'll move now to Mexico and the Pyramid of the Sun. Again, very sophisticated traditions of astronomy in the Valley of Mexico and histories, long histories, and as represented by this slide. In Mesoamerica, sources that survived the conquest, in the sources that we know survived the conquest, there are illustrations of an astronomical instrument called the crossed sticks that may have been used to determine the ascensions of stars and planets above the local horizons from fixed positions in temporal observations. Astronomical tables appear in the Dresden Codex that predict the precise movements and moments of the disappearance and reappearance of this culture hero. And these were developed at Chichen Itza. Dr. Anthony Avini is a leading American archaeoastronomer, believes that observations from the Archetypal, which is one of the structures in Chichen Itza, and other towers probably helped the Toltec and Mayan astronomers refine the predictive tables. What I think this slide represents is that indigenous peoples were practicing very sophisticated science for their time. They were continually observing, they were continually revising their observations, their ideas about how the universe worked. They were using complex mathematical systems, to calculate the movements of the sun, the moon, various planets such as Venus, and to actually calculate and create calendars to predict the appearance, for instance, of the morning star as the morning star mode, and the evening star in the evening star mode, which of course we know is the movement of Venus, through the night sky in relationship to the Earth and Sun. So in Mexico, in the Valley of Mexico, we find a really amazing representation of archaeological alignment, astronomical alignment, that we are still trying to understand today. So we have the Pyramid of the Sun, which I just showed you a slide of, and also the Pyramid of the Moon. And again, the relationship of the sun and moon. And off to the left-hand side of the slide, you see the pecked cross, which you also saw 8,000 years before in the Northern Rockies in the form of the medicine wheels. So we see that there may have been a connection and that this knowledge is an ongoing knowledge that has a huge history, with regard to native astronomies. And so ideas, were transferred from generation to generation, refined with each generation. And that knowledge was taken on the many kinds of journeys that indigenous people were taking throughout North America. So Western scientists believe that the windows in the upper story of the Archetypal enabled Mayan astronomers to make precise observations of the settings and risings of Venus, the celestial embodiment of the god Quetzalcoatl, which they incorporated into their mythology and their stories. This data shaped the Mayan calendars and the basis of the predictions that guided the life of their culture. So we have here a really great exemplification of how much influence astronomy had on the life, the culture, the societal, the intersocietal workings of the Mesoamericans, and why they went to such extent to elaborately represent, these entities, these celestial entities, not only in their stories and in their architecture, in their art, but also especially in their science. So here's the Archetypal, which is found in Chichen Itza, and it is thought to actually gauge the rising and setting of Venus. And you can see that from the Archetypal, you can also see the rising of Pollux, Castor, and Fomalhaut, which are all indicator stars for summer solstice events. So I moved now to California. The Chumash Indians of California saw an order in the sky which they modeled in their political and social organization. So as in the sky, so on earth, that idea of metaphor, the connection of sky and land. They believed the sun was an old man living in a quartz crystal house of light which traveled across the sky every day. The moon was a woman associated with the Tura, the vision plant, whose flowers opened in moonlight. The morning and evening star were two phases of Venus, the morning star being a helper of humankind, the evening star, a giant golden eagle who devoured human bones. The planets Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, along with the North Star and the Big Dipper, were the other principal beings of the sky, each with their own personality and temperament. So the Chumash at one time inhabited what today is some of the most expensive real estate in the world, in Santa Barbara County and in central California along the coast. And the Chumash are very important because they believed in a very intimate connection between what happened in the cosmos and what happened on Earth. So they believed that a primal energy permeated the universe, affected all its aspects and manifest expressions. This force was essentially neutral and could be used for human purposes if properly approached. There were three worlds of existence in the universe: the underworld, the middle world, the sky world. Each occupied various energies and beings. Humans lived in the middle world and could act as mediators between the worlds through properly enacted ritual. The forces of all three realms interacted with one another to create a dynamic balance. This balance was always precarious and could become destructive if humans were not vigilant in their ritual activity, which could preserve this balance. The Chumash had star priests, and they were called Al-Shuk-Lash, and they were part of a star society called the Antap Society, and they were also the leaders of the Chumash. And here's an example of one of the Al-Shuk-Lash members. The Chumash had a ceremony that was very interesting. They followed every change of the heavens and commemorated the key events, the solstices, the equinoxes, with communal ceremonies. So all of their ceremonies actually were connected in some way to observations that they were making with regard to the changes that they were seeing in the cosmos. So these ceremonies were presided over by astronomer priests, as I said, the Al-Shuklash, who was a member of the on-top elite caste of astronomer priests who actually spoke their own esoteric language, and from which the Chumash priests were chosen, or Chumash chiefs were chosen. The most important of these ceremonies were the winter solstice ceremonies, which reenacted the climax of the nightly ball game of the sky people, in which every night 2 teams of sky beings played a cosmic ball game in which the very life of the universe hung in balance. During these times, they would prepare for a ceremony, and they had this huge disc. One would call it a sun disc, but it was actually a large flat crystal. And here's an example of that crystal. And so that great game of the cosmos that they played expressed the cosmic play of this creation and destruction, which underlie the primordial dynamic of the universe, as the Chumash perceived it in its unfolding in the night sky. There were 2 teams. The team headed by Sky Coyote, which was Polaris, were the sky beings who represented the creative forces of the universe, while the team of the Old Man Sun represented the forces of destruction and entropy. So it was that on the evening of the winter solstice, the future life would be lost if forces of Old Man Sun defeated the Sky Coyote by pushing the forces of creation from the heavens, thus allowing the sun to leave the heavens and no longer rise to warm the earth. In order to ensure success, the Sky Coyote Chumash astronomers would yearly pull the sun back to the performance of their highest ritual called pulling the sun back, or pulling back the sun, through the use of a sacred sun disk, thereby assisting Sky Coyote and his forces to prevail for 1 more year. If you notice, especially when wintertime is coming, the sun is moving lower and lower in the horizon, and the days are shorter. This is one of the reasons why the days are shorter as we approach summer. I mean, as we approach winter. Until a winter day, that's the shortest day. The sun has is at its lowest ebb, within the horizon. And so the Chumash believed that if that were to continue, the sun would eventually move too far into the horizon so that it wouldn't come up again. And we would be left in the dark on the earth. And of course, the sun's heat would be lost. Life on earth would perish. And so the pulling back of the sun was an actual metaphoric ritual using the sun disk to pull the sun back so that it would begin to move back into its place in relationship to the earth. And so that was essentially what the ceremony was about. Those sun priests, the Al-Shuklash, actually were initiated through sky lore and through the traditions of the Chumash. In the Chumash area, the Santa Barbara area, there's a lot of caves, and so these caves have been actually explored. And in many of the caves, you find layer and layer and layer of what one would call star art. And for a long time, these were a mystery. But again, this was the Chumash area, and these caves were actually being used, for initiation of the Chumash star priests. And you can still find some of these caves. Here's an example of one of the caves and its star art. So these caves and the symbols which they contained have been postulated were used for initiation, instruction of young males by the Al-Shuklash, imbibing datura for visioning, fantastic, colorful art depicting symbols that the initiates envisioned and their representation of sky mythology. This Datura-mediated vision quest, together with other astronomically related ritual tools such as feathered poles against the horizon to sight solstice, rising and setting points. Star maps of shells were placed on cedar planks covered with tar, notched moon counting sticks, a corresponding star mythology, a star-inspired social political system, and extensive practical knowledge of heavenly movements defined Chumash astronomy as one of the most sophisticated of North America. So, though there are not too many Chumash people today, the Chumash had an amazingly rich and sophisticated tradition of astronomy. And of course, through colonization, much of this was lost and forgotten. And I think it's important, particularly for Indigenous people, to really reflect on what has been lost, but yet also what can be regained through research of Indigenous histories of not only astronomy, but relationship and use of plants, the relationship and use of land and landscapes. Again, I think this gives you an idea of how sophisticated this can be and was. So there's Star Coyote and one of his representations, the world of star beings, the pain of debts. So I'm going to leave us with this one last slide, because I think, on the Chumash, because I think it really does reflect some of the things that were important for Indigenous people and the connection Indigenous people had to astronomy. This ceremony, pulling back the sun, had a practical as well as cause dimension for the Chumash, in that at that time, chiefs from throughout the Chumash kingdom would assemble in the village of the Paha, the high chief of the Antap, with food, goods, shell, money that had been collected throughout the year. These goods were a form of tax revenue, which would then be redistributed to the people who had been widowed or orphaned during the year, to the elderly and the handicapped, and even to villages that had suffered a poor harvest or poor fishing during that year. This redistribution of wealth helped to restore and maintain social balance and welfare of the tribe. It also ensured that the Antap, the society of the astronomer priests, remained in good graces of the Chumash people and kept their support in this cosmically inspired political and social order. I use this as kind of my last, statement, with regard to this presentation, because I think in many ways it's so poignant to where we find ourselves today in the COVID time, with the economic and environmental crisis, looming above our heads, and understanding that this relationship that Native people had with the cosmos was an ongoing relationship that had to be worked, that was ceremonialized, that was artistically symbolized, that had practical value in organizing society in ways that allow for sustainability and for the maintenance and also for the extension of the people and the community through time and through space. So indeed, we are all star beings. And I think it gives us food for thought as we begin to think about our place in time and the relationship we have to these ideas and these perspectives. So I finished with you, these last perspectives. I hope it's been an interesting journey. Again, there's much more to every one of the slides that I showed you. As I said, there's a whole story to be had. I hope this interests you in exploring Indigenous science, Indigenous astronomies. Again, I thank you, as we say in my language, Wikunda. Thank you so much for your time and your attention. Nancy, it's all yours.
Thank you. Greg, in our language, ahehe and wado from my Cherokee and Navajo sides. That was a beautiful, brilliant presentation. And I think we all learned so much. And it was really fun actually watching all the questions and comments as you went on. We had lots of questions. And I think we'll just ask people to just send their questions to you as an email, and when you have time, you could answer some of them if you wish. Your words were inspiring. It was so comprehensive. It was such a great glimpse into these really unique societies that are still in place today and are still using the stars as guidance. And I think sharing what you did has been probably just exactly what people would have loved to have heard.
Well, what I hope to inspire with this presentation was, first of all, the sophistication and the extent of indigenous astronomies. And again, I just touched on examples from a few cultures, a few North American indigenous cultures, but actually all indigenous cultures have very sophisticated forms of astronomy if you take the time to explore them. Much of it is actually documented in anthropological, archaeological journals. But I think it's very important for people, first of all, indigenous people, to really begin to explore their own histories extensively. And then for non-indigenous people to really look at indigenous people as being a source of inspiration and real knowledge, actually, as we move into these very challenging times, that we're living in. There is a connection between Native and Western science. As I said, Native science is basically relational, and Western science is basically focused on the material object. I think you need both. Both ways of looking at the world complement each other. So it's a both and scenario. It's not an either or scenario. And that's what I hope to promote, with regard to Native people learning about their own histories of Native science, and also non-Native people learning about the histories of the history of the other and their sciences and their contributions, to human society as a whole.
Thank you, Greg. That is the spirit of this whole series, and you've encapsulated it beautifully. And you all in the audience, thanks for your patience as we had some technology glitches. Once again, the Coyote has ran through our series, and but as we always think, if people sometimes if you don't have the prompts to look at and the pictures for a little while, you start listening with both ears and your heart, and you may pick up something of value that you wouldn't have otherwise. So thank you for your slides. Thank you for your audio, your talk. And if you in the audience want more Indigenous astronomy, just write to us and let us know, because this is the end of the first series of 4. Now we're going to start another series of 4 more in October, which I'll tell you about in just a minute. I do want to extend some special thank yous to our technical supporters, because they had a very challenging time during this. I think Zoom threw a curve at them at the last minute, and so it wasn't necessarily your own Wi-Fi. But I want to extend special thanks to our technical support, Chris Tarrin from Tarrin Solutions, Art Ferrero, Jeff Cooper, and Almir Lungarik from the BLM Cater. I also want to acknowledge the BLM, San Juan Island National Monument, and its Superintendent Marcia de Chadney, as well as the San Juan Island National Historical Park and its Superintendent Alexis Freedy, and Joe Dolan, the park cultural anthropologist, for their support and funding for this series. We'll be sending an email out to you just after this presentation with a very short survey asking your reaction to what you've heard today. Please take the time to answer the questions, because this is really helpful for us to inform our future program design. We will be recording everything, and you will be able to access it on our website, www.indigenouseducation.org. Probably within a week it will be posted, as have been our other 3 speaker presentations. Now, this is also a save the date. Our next presenter is Chad Kalepa Babayan. Born and raised on Maui in the Hawaiian Islands, Kalepa Babayan first sailed on the Hokulea in 1975, a traditionally designed reconstruction of a double-hulled deep-sea oceanic voyaging canoe. He has since sailed on many major voyages throughout the Pacific, and in 2014, he participated as captain and navigator on the Malama Honua worldwide voyage, a 47,000 nautical mile journey around the world that visited 26 countries and stopped at 85 ports. He currently serves as the navigator in residence at the Imiloa Astronomy Center of Hawaii, developing wayfinding activities, curriculum materials, and conducting outreach. In 2007, his teacher, Master Navigator Mau Pilog, on the tiny Micronesian atoll of Satawal, initiated Kalepa into the Order of Po, a 3,000-year-old society of deep-sea navigators. We would love to have you return for Kalepa's talk, which will take place on October 15th at noon Pacific time. Thanks so much for your interest, and we'll see you soon. Ahehe, hagone, and goodbye.